Welcome to MeatsPad, a platform dedicated to sharing breakthrough knowledge that is accessible to the meats industry. On each episode, we will hear from meat specialists and professionals to talk about numerous topics in meat science, including animal welfare, meat production, meat quality, food safety, and so much more.
Hello, meat folks. Welcome back to the MeatsPad podcast. This is Phil Bass. I'll be your solo host today while Francisco's out making the world a better place for us meat enthusiasts. And today we have a special guest, Brandon Fields. Brandon, thanks for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So Brandon, you are with PIC. What is PIC? And tell us all about what you do.
So PIC originally stood for Pig Improvement Company, and we are a swine genetics company. We supply breeding stock to global pork producers around the world.
Okay. All right. And so you're producing breeding stock, trying to just improve the overall herd of commercial hogs.
Yes.
Throughout the world, not just in North America.
Absolutely.
You have developed a production manual of sorts. Is that right?
So we have many production manuals. Specifically in my department, we've just created the Total Carcass Value Handbook.
Okay.
So really focusing as a manual for anyone looking for what it takes taking that pig to pork.
Okay.
And some of the best practices to ensure the best pork quality possible.
So in short, can you tell us a little bit about what those practices may be? Give us some examples. We have a lot of small and medium-sized processors that maybe communicate regularly with their producers, and so maybe you could give them a few hints.
So what we try to do with this manual is kind of blend the science and the practical applications. So there's a lot of hopefully useful tips for the industry. Just everything from the basic concepts of animal welfare and how that impacts stress and ultimately quality, stunner settings to ideally manage from an electrical stun or a CO2 stun to ensure insensibility, as well as to prevent any defects through management of the chilling process in terms of how to optimally chill the carcass from a little bit from a food safety standpoint, but primarily, again, focused on those quality metrics of color, managing pH, drip loss, and those type of things.
Yeah. Well, and there's definitely some challenges that we may encounter in the pork industry, and so it really is important to stun those animals appropriately. Of course, handle them as calm and quietly as we can beforehand, and this shouldn't be anything new to processors out there, but sometimes we need to be reminded, right?
Right. Yeah. I don't think there's any groundbreaking information in this handbook that people can't find in numerous other places. We used over 100 literature references in the writing of this, so it's kind of science-backed fact.
Yeah.
But it's trying to put it into those practical terms of things they do every day. Sometimes you just forget because you've been doing it so much you don't realize.
Yeah.
And that's kind of our goal there, is just kind of a different format for them to have as a reference manual and material.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so that's so important to continually, not only to continually learn, but also sometimes just be reminded of certain practices that are going to improve the pork quality. Ultimately, we have to produce something that people want to eat, not just safe, but they want to eat.
That is the goal.
Yeah, exactly. So and along those lines, let's visit just a little bit about the importance of pork quality, and specifically with the fat texture and firmness.
Right. So fat quality is a big component of pork quality, especially when we're talking about fresh meat export to the Asian countries where quality is such a premium for them and they're willing to pay for it as long as they get what they need. Not only that, when we're getting into bacon production and some of the further processed meats production, you'll see it a lot of a concern in Europe, for example, where they're doing a lot of dry curing of hams, and they need that right fatty acid profile to really get the product to cure and have the right flavor profile at the end.
So what are some tips that our producers may need to try to get that more firm fat?
So the simple thing with pigs are great because more or less what you feed a pig in terms of a fat source is what it deposits. So as a production arm, the ingredients we're putting into our diet really dictate the quality of our fat. There's not much can be done at the slaughter plant because the fat's deposited and there it is.
Right.
So.
Yeah. We're stuck at that point. So, so thinking of maybe more monounsaturated fats in their diets then?
Yeah, I mean, just anything. It's a combination of fat types. So if you want to be very general, right, we'll talk about saturated or unsaturated. If we feed a more saturated diet to the pig, then it's going to have more saturated fat being produced. And beyond that, it's also the total inclusion rate of fat in the diet. So people always want to bash DDGs, distiller grains, and think that's detrimental. Well, it can be when it's fed in extremely high levels, but at the same time, we can add 2% of soy oil and have a bigger negative impact than we can from 20% of DDGs.
Okay.
Because, again, it's what is the fat in the diet proportionally and what the consistency of that fat is.
Yeah. Well, and for those out there that are less familiar with what DDGs are, dried distillers grains, or can you feed it in the wet form as well, or is it pretty much always dry for pork?
It can be included into some wet feeds, but the majority here in the United States, we're going to be focusing on dry and pelletized feed.
And that is a byproduct of the ethanol industry, and in the United States we generate a lot of grains that can be used for producing ethanol that goes into our cars, and it becomes that blend in gasoline. But this is a great byproduct that now we can use for a feed source for livestock.
Of course.
Yeah, and beyond the fats source. It can also it also has a great protein content. Is that right?
It's more of an energy source than a protein source. I mean, It's coming from corn, so it is your energy source is really what you're focused on. Okay. It does have, of course, a bit of protein, but primarily, it's used as a replacement for corn in the diet.
Okay, yeah. So tell me more about why that firmer fat is so important, maybe from a domestic standpoint.
Sure. So from a domestic standpoint, the easy explanation is bacon.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, you probably love bacon.
Yeah.
And so when we think of the advantages of firm versus soft fat, probably all of us at some point in our life have bought that package of bacon, and that's about a 12-inch slice, and you start pulling it out of that package to get ready to drop it in the frying pan, and all of a sudden you're like, oh crap, that 12-inch slice of bacon is now 24 inches,
right.
and it doesn't fit in my frying pan anymore. Well, a lot of that is due to soft fat, and when we can get that firmer fat in place, when we pull it out, it's going to hold the shape better, it's going to fry up better, it's likely going to taste a little better. And certainly if we're doing any, I learned it from my grandma and still do it, is save that bacon grease.
Yeah.
It makes the beans and everything later taste better. So you'll get better. It won't oxidize as quickly, so you'll get less rancidity. Okay. When you are attempting to store it, it sets up in the jar. It looks nice and bright and white, and that's what we're really after.
Well, and so not just from a consumer's perspective, but then also from the processor's side, that firmer fat, if you are slicing bacon, it's gonna slice a lot better.
It's gonna slice a lot better. They're gonna get better yields in their product, and it's gonna be generally better economics for the whole industry, from the processor all the way through to the consumer acceptance and repeat purchase.
It's hard to beat pork fat, man. Oh my gosh,
that is a fact.
But if you can make it better and more desirable for both the consumer and the processor, then it truly is a win-win. There's really not much. And you'll get human medical doctors like to complain about our saturated fat intake, but again, as long as we're eating in moderation, there should be no negative connotations to that as well. Yeah. How about the intramuscular fat? Is that something that you guys focus on?
Absolutely. Again, back to that fresh meat export, specifically for Asian products, possibly for higher end restaurants or niche market use where they're really demanding some of that higher IMF product. We would certainly, as a genetics company, be selecting for that in our products.
Okay. Yeah, and for those out there who are less familiar with the scientific term intramuscular fat, that's the marbling fat.
That is the marbling.
And we know that it does enhance palatability. And so do you recommend or do you work with there are some marbling standards out there
yes.
That the pork the Pork Checkoff, I believe.
Yeah, the
manages,
National
right?
Pork Board and actually American Meat Science Association is kind of in charge of the distribution of some of that now.
Okay.
You can buy it on the AMSA store.
Well, I would really recommend any processors, large or small, to consider that type of selection process because we know that the marbling does enhance the flavor, the juiciness, the tenderness of the product, but then also really focus on where your pigs are coming from and what they're being fed to maintain that firmness of the fat, which is so important for the further processing.
Right, and honestly, in pork, there's a lesser impact of marbling content and amount on some of those traits than there is in beef. It's a much greater impact in beef, obviously.
Sure.
But yeah, it's certainly important from a visual appeal. There is a component. If you get less than 2% IMF, you do absolutely lose some flavor and some acceptability on some of the consumer taste test stuff.
Sure, yeah. How'd you get involved with all this, Brandon? Where'd you start?
Oh, man, that is a long story. That might go beyond our 15 minutes, but the simple answer in about 2 minutes is I went to Purdue University to be an engineer. And then I had some calculus and physics that convinced me I didn't want to be an engineer any longer. And through some soul searching, I ended up in a meat science class as something that sounded really cool.
Yeah.
And I started working in a university meats lab because I wanted to learn how to cut up my own deer better.
There you go.
And the rest is history.
The rest is history.
I found something that I've loved, and I've stuck with it now I've been in PIC for 25 years and kind of been working in the industry for about 28.
No kidding. Wow. Well, thank you for your service and for all that you're doing to continually improve the pork product and improve the hogs. And it's a pleasure to hear that we are making those efforts.
Absolutely.
And that's going to be good for the consumer. It's going to be good for the processor. Ultimately, that should be good for the farmer as well.
That's our goal, right?
Yeah.
To have that efficient pig at the production level that's got the processing yields that are needed for the processor. But at the end of the day, if the consumer doesn't enjoy it, none of us are going to have a job. That's the real goal there, is ensuring that pork quality satisfies the consumer.
Gosh, what a quote! Hopefully Francisco grabs that quote and puts it up on our website, because man, that's something that we often have to be reminded of as well.
Yeah,
right?
that's right. We all work for somebody.
That's right. Ultimately, it's the consumer eating our beautiful product that we're able to generate in this country. And so, Brandon, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully we'll catch up another time.
Yeah, you're very welcome and happy to do it at any point.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Yep.